100 kilometers off BC's northernmost coast and just south of the southernmost reaches of the Alaskan Panhandle lies Haida Gwaii, a remote archipelago home to 4,800 people, over 2,000 of whom are Haida First Nations. Logging has been taking place on the island since the late 19th century, and over the last 4 decades the Haida people have fought the logging companies for increasing control over the forest practices taking place on their islands. Their story is one of protest and conflict, negotiation, agreement, and ultimately landmark victories for the Haida, for Aboriginal self-government, and for sustainable resource management practices. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, after original settlers had more or less failed in establishing agricultural land on the islands, the vast, easily accessible stands of red cedar and western hemlock facilitated the start of a logging industry on Haida Gwaii. During World War II, the war efforts, and especially demand for Sitka spruce to build mosquito bombers, really uncovered the potential of the islands as a major source of timber. After the war, logging continued at a high rate, reaching a peak in the 1960s with 2.2 million cubic meters logged per year. As it became clear that logging was going to remain a prominent sector of the island's economy, the Haida began to worry about the destructive nature of the industry and its expansion into lush, old-growth forests in the south of the archipelago. They began negotiating with the federal and provincial governments over the creation of a protected area in the southern half of the islands, as outlined in the South Moresby Wilderness Proposal in 1974. By 1985, however, the Haida were frustrated by years of fruitless talks and took matters into their own hands, blockading a logging road on Lyle Island in the south of the archipelago.
In British Columbia, a dispute over the future of a wilderness area in the Queen Charlotte Islands has led to a confrontation. This week, a group of Haida Indians began obstructing the passage of logging crews into the South Moresby area. The loggers and the Indians have been negotiating unsuccessfully for the past 12 years. Next week, they'll meet in court.
Last Wednesday morning, a group of Haida came to Sedgwick Bay on Lyle Island to protect this lifestyle.
You're breaking the law, and you're stopping us from going to work, and we ask you to step aside and let us continue.
There will be no logging on the area that the Haida people have designated as not to be touched. This is Haida land, and there'll be no further logging in this area. It's time that in the exploitation of resources and in the management of these islands, that the people who are here sharing these lands with us respect equally with everyone else the aspirations and the values of the Haida Nation. These are our homelands. We've been here for thousands of years. We intend to be here for thousands more.
Nearby in Skidegate, a Haida village, the elders say this is not a happy time. They know their stand is creating friction in the community.
We never ever said we would stop logging. We never once said that. We just wanted controlled logging. A lot of our people are loggers, and there's no way that we would ever stop that.
On Tuesday, the forest companies will be in court to get an injunction to remove the Haida protesters. This is likely to be the first shot in a long legal battle over who controls this area. Regardless of who wins, both sides fear plenty of bitterness will remain. Georges Ramel, CBC News, in the Queen Charlotte Island.
The Lyle Island blockade resulted in the provincial and federal governments signing the South Moresby Memorandum of Understanding with the Council of the Haida Nation in 1987, which led to the South Moresby Agreement in 1988, outlining plans for the creation of a national park to protect the South Moresby area. In 1993, the Gwaii Agreement was signed, officially creating Gwaii National Park and Haida Heritage Site. Gwaii is governed by the Archipelago Management Board, which is comprised of equal representation from the Canadian government and the Council of the Haida Nation. This marked the first time a First Nation won the right to co-manage a national park on its traditional lands, and was a landmark victory for both environmentalists and natives alike. The creation of Gwaii reduced the annual cut on Haida Gwaii by about 20%, but after that, logging continued at a fairly stable rate through the rest of the 1990s and early 2000s. In 1999, the logging company Macmillan Bloedel, which held rights to most of Haida Gwaii's logging land through Block 6 of BC's Tree Farm License 39, was bought by global logging powerhouse Weyerhaeuser. Starting in 2000, the Haida Nation began a period of negotiation with the provincial government over land use planning. They signed the Land Use Planning Protocol Agreement in 2001, establishing protocol for the land use planning process, and then engaged in a community planning forum with the province, local communities, NGOs, and businesses with a stake in the land use agreements on the islands. During this period, the Coast Information Team and the 2004 Environmental Conditions Report established the need for ecosystem-based management on Haida Gwaii. These developments resulted in cementing the principle behind land use planning on the islands, mainly environmental sustainability through ecosystem-based management, local economic growth, and preserving Haida culture. These principles were underlined in the Haida Land Use Vision and the framework for the eventual Strategic Land Use Plan. In 2005, Weyerhaeuser were preparing to sell Tree Farm License 39 to the asset management company Brascan without consulting the CHN, whose land claim with the Canadian government included Block 6 of that TFL. There was certainly no love lost between Islanders and Weyerhaeuser, but there was a greater fear that the new ownership group would need to see a fast return on their investment and would increase the rate of logging on the islands at the expense of the environment and the communities. In March of 2005, Haidas and other islanders blockaded 2 key logging roads for over a month in protest against the sale. Dubbed Island Spirit Rising, this island-wide movement was an act of solidarity among locals against foreign logging interests, and a show of support for sustainable resource management practices. Following the blockade, the sale of TFL 39 fell through, and the talks between the CHN and the provincial government intensified in a period called the government-to-government era. It was determined in 2005 that the Haida were to be granted a 120,000 cubic meter forest tenure in the form of a community forest license. And in 2006 and 2007, the entire islands were subject to a timber supply review and a timber opportunity analysis to determine the viability of an 800,000 cubic meter annual cut under an ecosystem-based management system. In 2007, the landmark Haida Gwaii Strategic Land Use Agreement was signed by the CHN and the province. It was a culmination of the Community Planning Forum, the Haida Land Use Vision, and the studies done in the pre-blockade years. It declares a need for the creation of more protected areas and provides a detailed plan for the use of Haida Gwaii's resources under ecosystem-based management. In 2008, the Misty Islands Economic Development Society was founded as a body whose purpose is to promote and stimulate economic growth on the islands in an era of declining logging. In 2009, 11 new protected Haida heritage sites were created on the islands. In 2010, the Haida Land Use Objectives Order signed the Strategic Land Use Agreement into law. The next landmark agreement was signed in 2010. The Reconciliation Protocol redefines the relationship between the CHN and the provincial government. It implements a shared decision-making process for resource issues and authorizes the CHN to implement the Strategic Land Use Agreement and requires them to approve the annual allowable cut for the whole islands. The CHN receive another 120,000 cubic meter forest tenure and $10 million to purchase existing tenures. The agreement also creates a system for carbon credits to be granted for Haida Gwaii's forests, which creates an incentive not to log the islands. Now, the Haida Nation is currently finalizing the process of acquiring TFL 60, which was formerly Block 6 of TFL 39, the main tree farm license on Haida Gwaii, using money from the Reconciliation Protocol. They have reached an agreement with the current holders Western Forest Products and have already taken full control of operations on the license through their forest company, Tawn Forest. In the takeover, they stopped all market logging of monumental cedar on the island. In September, Tawn Forest announced its intention to seek Forest Stewardship Council certification, keeping in tradition with the sustainable, responsible resource management they have long lobbied for. At this point, it's safe to say that the negotiations between the Haida and the logging companies have been overwhelmingly favorable for the Haida, who have gone from mere bystanders to co-managers of the national park and managers of forest practices outside the park. They have control over their land like no other First Nation in BC, and their multiple landmark victories are setting precedent for other First Nations battling the governments and private interests. It's also worth noting that amidst all this, the CHN is also locked in a land claim battle at the Supreme Court of Canada, a battle that many experts predict that they will win. Whether or not this happens, it's very likely that this is not the end of the Haida Nation's rise to power.